The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians is one of the most enduring and complex in the world. It is not only a political struggle, but also it is mainly a religious one, rooted in centuries of history and sacred texts. In this video, we will explore how sectarian and religious beliefs have an important role in today's conflict, and how they fuel the violences and hatred that plague both sides. The Jewish people have always maintained their identity and faith throughout their history. They consider themselves as the chosen people of God who gave them the Torah, or the law, at Mount Sinai. The Torah contains many commandments and teachings that guide their lives. One of them is the belief that God gave them the land of Israel as an eternal inheritance. This belief is also supported by other Jewish texts, such as the Talmud, which is a collection of rabbinic interpretations and discussions. According to Jewish sources, the land of Israel includes not only the territory within the modern state of Israel, but also parts of Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and Iraq. Some Jews also believe that they have a religious obligation to settle and control the land, especially Jerusalem, which is considered as their spiritual capital and the site of their future temple. Some extremist Jews or Zionists even mention that the two blue lines in the Israeli flag are pointing to two rivers of Nile and Euphrates as their west and east borders. Zionism, established as a political organization in 1897, was originally a movement for the re-establishment of a Jewish nation, and is now for the development and protection of it in what is now Israel. The Hebrew Bible tells the story of the Israelites who were enslaved in Egypt and liberated by Moses, who led them to the promised land. In Exodus 23:31, Torah, addressing the Jew nation, says, "I will establish your borders from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean Sea, and from the desert to the Euphrates River. I will give into your hands the people who live in that land, and you will drive them out before you. Do not make an agreement with them or with their gods." In the Promised Land, the Jews established a kingdom under David and Solomon, who built the first temple in Jerusalem. The Hebrew Bible also mentions another people who lived in the region, the Philistines. They were enemies of the Israelites and fought many battles with them. The Philistines are believed to have originated from southern Europe and settled on the coastal plain of what is now Israel and Gaza. Both Israelites and Philistines were eventually scattered and assimilated by other hegemonic civilizations. The Torah portrays the Philistines as a hostile and oppressive people who occupied and contested the land that God promised to give to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It also cites other biblical passages that command the Israelites to destroy or dispossess the Canaanites and other nations that inhabited the land before them. Canaan is the ancient region lying between Jordan or the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean, the land promised by God to Abraham, according to Genesis 12, verses 5 to 10. Another example of such a monopolist looks on the land of Canaan is in Numbers 33, verses 50 to 53, where it says, "On the plains of Moab, by the Jordan, across from Jericho, the Lord said to Moses, 'Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you cross the Jordan into Canaan, drive out all the inhabitants of the land before you. Destroy all their carved images and their cast idols, and demolish all their high places. You are to take possession of the land and settle in it, for I have given you the land to possess.'" Then in 55th and 56th verses, it continues, "But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land, those you allow to remain will become barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides. They will give you trouble in the land where you will live, and then I will do to you what I plan to do to them. These passages reflect the ancient Israelites' worldview and their understanding of God's will for them, which can now easily shape the modern Israelis' mindset and behavior. Some radical rabbis or Jewish clerics or extremist Zionist politicians who also have or had power in Israel have used these passages to justify their modern political agenda and their disregard for international law and human rights. They claim that God has given them the exclusive right to the land of Israel and that they have a religious duty to expel or exterminate the Palestinians, whom they view as the enemies of God and Israel. They also base their claim on the assumption that the present-day Palestinians are the descendants of the ancient Philistines, who were called the enemies of God and the Promised Land in the Hebrew Bible. They also oppose any division or sharing of Jerusalem, which they regard as their eternal and undivided capital. One of the examples of these leaders is the current Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, who has used the conflict to boost his popularity and legitimacy among his right-wing and religious base and to divert attention from his corruption scandals and political challenges. He has also used the conflict to justify his hardline policies and actions against the Palestinians, such as expanding settlements, annexing part of the West Bank, and rejecting any negotiations or concessions. He also claimed that he has scientific evidence that proves that the ancient Philistines, who are the ancestors of Palestinians, came from outside of Israel or the Aegean region, and they have no right to the land. Even if we assume his claim is right based on his reasoning, we have to expel most residents of today's continent of America, as most of its population came from European countries a few centuries ago. This argument is not only illogical but also hypocritical, as he himself is a descendant of European Jews who immigrated to Israel in the 20th century. Christianity emerged from Judaism in the 1st century CE as a sect that followed Jesus Christ, a Jewish preacher who claimed to be the Messiah, or the Anointed One, sent by God. Christians believe that Jesus was crucified by the Romans in Jerusalem, but resurrected from the dead and ascended to heaven. They also believe that he will return one day to establish his kingdom on earth. Christians regard Israel and Palestine as holy too, because they are connected to the life and ministry of Jesus Christ, who was born in Bethlehem, preached in Galilee, and died and resurrected in Jerusalem. They also respect many places that are sacred to Jews, such as the Western Wall, the Temple Mount, and the Mount of Olives. The sacredness of Jerusalem was abused by some Christians as well over the course of history. They launched a series of military campaigns, known as the Crusades, to capture the Holy Land from the Muslims. The Crusades lasted from the 11th to the 13th century, and involved thousands of soldiers and pilgrims from Europe who fought and died for the sake of Jerusalem. The Crusaders often committed atrocities and massacres against the local population, regardless of their religion. One of the most famous crusaders was King Richard I. He came from a land as far as England to fight for conquering Jerusalem in the Third Crusade from 1189 till 1192. He fought against the legendary Muslim leader Saladin, who had recaptured Jerusalem in 1187. In modern times, some Christians, especially evangelicals who have some political influence in the United States, also believe that God has a special plan for Israel and its people, and that they have a role in fulfilling biblical prophecies about the end times. These prophecies include the return of Jesus to Jerusalem, the restoration of the Jewish temple, and the Battle of Armageddon. Evangelicals are strongly supported by AIPAC, an Israeli lobby group in the United States, which advocates for pro-Israel policies and legislation. Many American politicians who are not Jews have also expressed their support and admiration for Israel, calling themselves Zionists. They include presidents, senators, governors, mayors, and other influential figures from both major parties. They have various reasons for their stance, such as shared values and interests, personal or religious connections, or strategic considerations. Some of the most famous figures on this list are Donald Trump, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Joe Biden.
I mean, I used to say early on when I was a kid, I'd say, when I was a young senator, I'd say, if I were a Jew, I'd be a Zionist. I am a Zionist. You don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist.
The values regarded by American politicians as shared values with Israel are often propagandized as democratic values. However, Israel perceives itself as a Jewish state, and that automatically contradicts its democratic position, as in Israel, a non-Jewish person is in practice a second-class citizen. Most unbiased and straightforward-thinking scholars argue that Israel is not a true democracy, but a theocracy or an ethnocracy. They point out that Israel gives preferential treatment to Jews over non-Jews, especially Palestinians, in terms of citizenship, immigration, land ownership, education, healthcare, and civil rights. The history and political experience have proved that once a state ties its governance values to sectarian beliefs, it will violate the rights of non-religious people, and it cannot be counted as a real democracy. Such a failed example of theocracy overruling democracy in practice in the modern world is the Islamic Republic of Iran, which ironically is the most stubborn enemy of this other theocratic state, Israel, even denying its existence. However, America is not the only country where non-Jewish politicians have declared themselves as Zionists. In Europe, there are also many leaders who have shown their solidarity and alliance with Israel, despite facing criticism or opposition from some of their constituents and counterparts. They include prime ministers, presidents, ministers, and members of parliament. They have also expressed different motivations for their positions, such as historical or moral responsibility, cultural or economic ties, or security concerns. Some examples of non-Jewish European politicians who have identified themselves as Zionists are Boris Johnson, Emmanuel Macron, and Angela Merkel. To support Zionism, they sometimes go as far as defying their own democratic values, such as freedom of expression. For instance, the judicial system of France prosecuted, convicted, and fined Roger Garaudy for Holocaust denial, even though he questioned the scale of it, not the whole of it, and criticized the Zionists' use of the Holocaust as a justifying dogma for their agenda, especially in Palestine and toward Palestinians. Unfortunately, these blind expressions of support for Israel by non-Jewish politicians can sometimes add to the sensitivity and animosity between Palestinians and Israelis. Some Palestinians may feel betrayed or abandoned by their international community. Some Israelis may feel emboldened or entitled to pursue their interests or agendas without regard for the consequences or costs. Some extremists on both sides may use these expressions of support as an excuse or justification for their hatred or violence. Muslims consider Israel and Palestine as holy too because they are linked to many prophets and events mentioned in the Quran. They also revere Jerusalem as the third holiest city in Islam after Mecca and Medina. Jerusalem is the site of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is believed to be the place where Muhammad ascended to heaven and prayed with other prophets. Muslims also believe that they are the successors of Abraham and his son Ishmael, who are regarded as the ancestors of the Arabs. Some religious Muslims believe that they have a duty to defend the holy places in Palestine, especially Jerusalem, from Jewish encroachment or desecration. They also oppose any recognition or normalization of Israel, which they regard as an illegitimate entity that occupies Muslim land. The Quran mentions Bani Israel, meaning the children of Israel, or basically Israelis, more than 40 times, and criticizes them for their disobedience, ingratitude, corruption, and rebellion against God and His messengers. And we conveyed to the children of Israel in the scripture that you will surely cause corruption on the earth twice, and you will surely reach a degree of great haughtiness. So when the time of the first promise came, we sent against you servants of ours, those of great military might, and they probed into the homes. And that was a promise fulfilled. Chapter Al-Isra, verses 4 and 5. Some extremist and radical political leaders and clerics of Islam have abused these verses to incite hatred and violence against Israel and spread anti-Semitism. There is also a historical clash between the Muslims and Jews in 627 CE that many extremists from both sides have used to create more animosity between them. The clash happened between the early Muslims and the Bani Qurayza, a Jewish tribe near Medina, who secretly violated their treaty with Muhammad and sided with the Meccan pagans who attacked Medina in the Battle of the Trench. However, their plot was exposed by a Muslim spy, and they were besieged by Muhammad and his followers for 25 days until they surrendered. Then a verse was revealed in chapter Al-Anfal, verse 57 of the Quran, to permit action against the Jewish tribe. If you ever encounter them in battle, make a fearsome example of them, so perhaps those who would follow them may be deterred. As the Bani Qurayza were not the only Jewish tribe opposing the Muslims, we can easily deduce that this verse was asking Muhammad to punish them in a way that other Jewish tribes would learn a lesson. Muhammad delegated the judgment of the Bani Qurayza to Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, a leader of the Aus tribe who was wounded in the battle. Sa'd had some ties with the Bani Qurayza, who were his clients or allies before Islam. The Aus and the Bani Qurayza had a long history of cooperation and conflict, and they had agreed to accept Sa'd's verdict. Sa'd decided to execute all their men and enslave their women and children based on his interpretation of the Torah, even though he was never a Jew. In fact, the appointment of Sa'd to judge the Bani Qurayza by Muhammad was just a deceitful politic for several reasons. He wanted to honor Sa'd, who was dying. He wanted to avoid any accusation of bias or injustice. He wanted to respect the tribal customs and laws, and at the same time, he wanted to fulfill the command that he received in that verse of Quran we just talked about. According to many early Islamic sources, the number of men who were beheaded ranged from 600 to 900, and the execution was carried by some of Muhammad's closest companions, such as Ali ibn Abi Talib, who are ironically known for his chivalry, manners, and gallantry among Muslims. And yet, all these still happened under Muhammad's watch, and he could have stopped this brutal execution by his power.
مولای ما امیرالمومنین اون مرد نمونه عالم و در رحم و مروت اونطور با مستکبرین و با کسانی که توطئه میکنند شمشیر را میکشت و 700 نفر را در یک روز از یهود بنی قریظه که نظیر اسرائیل بود و اینها از نسل اونها شاید باشند از دم شمشیر گذران.
We see that all these supposedly sacred texts have a very powerful potential to incite violence in today's world. Although some may say that these ancient texts have only recorded the history of ancient clans and they're not recommending any corresponding action in today's world, this is not how religious fanatics and clerics think about their holy books. Basically, by naming their books sacred texts, the clerics and sectarian radicals imply that every part of their text can be interpreted as a divine instruction and has an all-time application. Therefore, as long as the international community accepts this perception that some of these ancient texts are holy and should be untouched, respected, and not criticized or dealt with, we will continue to witness these hateful conflicts in today's world. Nonetheless, the source of the conflict is not only bound to the problematic sacred texts or who should own the land, but it's also who can pray where inside the Temple of Jerusalem. The trigger of the recent conflict in October 2023 between Israelis and Palestinians was a series of events that involved the holy site known to Jews as the Temple Mount and to Muslims as the Haram al-Sharif, or the Noble Sanctuary in Jerusalem. As mentioned before, this site is revered by all Abrahamic religions as the location of ancient temples and mosques, and as the place where Abraham was asked to sacrifice his son, where Solomon built his temple, where Jesus preached, and where Muhammad ascended to heaven. It is also one of the most contested and sensitive places in the world, as both sides claim sovereignty and access rights over it. The Temple Mount complex is administered by a Jordanian Islamic trust, which allows non-Muslims to visit, but not to pray. Israel maintains overall security control over the site, but does not interfere with the Islamic Trust authority. However, some Jewish religious groups have challenged this status quo, demanding more access and rights to pray at the site. They also advocate for rebuilding the Jewish temple on the site, which would require destroying the Islamic structures there. Some Muslim religious groups have opposed these demands, accusing Israel of trying to change or erase the Islamic identity of the site. They also call for defending and protecting the site from any Jewish encroachment or desecration. The situation deteriorated in October 2023 when Israel decided to temporarily close the site to non-Muslims after a Jewish extremist attempted to assassinate a prominent Palestinian activist who campaigned for Palestinian rights at the site. The closure sparked outrage among some Jewish groups who accused Israel of capitulating to Palestinian pressure and violating their religious freedom. They staged protests and tried to force their way into the site, clashing with Israeli police and Palestinian worshippers. The violence spread to the other parts of Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza, where Palestinians threw stones, firebombs, and knives at Israeli soldiers and civilians, and where Israel responded with tear gas, rubber bullets, and live fire. Hamas, the Islamist group that controls Gaza, also launched rockets and mortars at Israel, which retaliated with airstrikes and artillery. To conclude this clip, I will share with you a beautiful poem by Rumi, the famous Iranian poet and mystic who wrote about the harmony of religions. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. If you did, please show your appreciation by liking this video and sharing it with others who might benefit from it. Let us work together to create a peaceful world, especially in these troubled times when the threat of a global war is looming. After the rise of Christ, there ruled a Jew who oppressed the Christians without a clue. Jesus and Moses seemed different to this misled cross-eyed tyrant.